I wish I knew before I started learning Spanish. I'm going to share with you everything that I've learned along my Spanish learning journey so far, and what would have really helped me had I known it before I'd gotten started. But before I get started, please let me know down below in the comments if you are learning Spanish, and if you are, what stage you are in the Spanish learning process, if you are beginner, intermediate, advanced, somewhere in between, and if you are struggling in any areas, if there is anywhere that you would like my support in, down below in the comments. I'll be responding to all of your guys' questions around language learning and Spanish specifically, and think of me like your language coach in the comments down there, and I'm going to be helping you guys out there. So let me know down below, and let's get started with the video. So what I wish I knew before I started learning Spanish is that I wish that I had been more open to learning from my teachers, from my Spanish teachers, and going to my classes, and had not decided so early on that I knew the things that I was learning. So this may sound a bit obvious. It may sound like, oh man, of course you don't know what you're learning it. But many of us, we learn something and then we have a tendency to say, oh yeah, I learned that, I'm done with it, and then put it aside and move on. Well, the issue with that is that once we learn something, we learn it at a beginner level. And then once we progress to another level, say that intermediate level, well, now we are learning intermediate content, but we also have to revisit that beginner material to understand it at an intermediate level. So even like using present tense, for example, or using, simple past tenses, we learn them in the beginner stage. We learn, oh, this is preterite, this is imperfect, this is present, but we aren't really able to use them in conversation at that stage. We're not able to form sentences and ideas well at the beginner stage. We are able to at the intermediate stage, though. We are able to use those structures and those concepts at the intermediate stage, and then add on to our intermediate level content, our grammar. We learn, I learn subjunctive, we learn future tense, we learn all kinds of other tenses and grammar and vocabulary and all of that. But we still have to integrate that beginner level content in as well. And then we get to the advanced stage. Well, that's really the integration of all of it, all the way through, is that beginner content, that intermediate content, and then advanced is not really that much new content. It is just applying what we've learned. So it is a little bit new. There's always a little bit new, but mostly it's learning how to use what we've learned up until this point. Because your first couple of years of learning a language, if you're going through university structure or format or following that time length, it is, for the most part, it's memorization and just regurgitation of what you learned. And then when you get to that more intermediate, that advanced level, then now what we're doing is actually applying it. So what I wish I knew is that I wish I knew that, and I wish I knew that the beginning was just the beginning. I needed to continue to be integrated. I wish that I knew that I wasn't done with that material after I learned it, that at the intermediate stage I wasn't then done and then moving on, because what happened is I then had to go back and relearn all of these structures and vocabulary and grammar, because I thought, oh, I'm done. So I'm going to focus on the stuff that I need at the intermediate level, or that I need at the advanced level. And that was a mistake. That held me back and slowed me down because I didn't know. And so as a language learner, now when I start learning a new language, my strategy is completely different, because I know what that process is. I know what that process is of starting a language, going through the beginner level, going through the intermediate level, going to the advanced level, going to fluency. And now I can streamline that process. So when I learn a new language now, I don't focus so much on mastering each of those structures and topics and tenses and grammars in the beginning of the language learning process. It's more of I need to expose myself to all of these structures. I need to get them moving in my head, start thinking about them, start allowing my brain to process them. And then after I have been introduced to everything, now I can start really using the language. So this is difficult if you are going through a course like at a university or high school or anywhere like that, because of course you're tested on these things, and I really wish that we weren't tested that way, but we have to be tested in some way, and that's how it is. So if you were taking a course, college, high school, anything, of course you need to do what is necessary in that course to pass tests, to progress through that. But what you can do for yourself as well while you're going through that is keep this in mind, and also use alternative resources aside from what you're doing in your course to create this knowledge of this. And if I were to go into another college course to start a language, then what I would do, and what I have done, is make myself so well versed in the understandings of all of those foundational structures that I mentioned, like just the exposure to them, not necessarily understanding them, but say like Duolingo, for example, going through the whole tree. You go through the whole thing. Now you have some amount of experience, a little bit of experience with all of the structures, all of the core structures within the language. And if you were to say do Duolingo all the way through, I love Duolingo. I have used it for Spanish and for French, and this video is not sponsored in any way, but that's what I have done. And then once you've done that, and you can use any programs, it doesn't have to be Duolingo, but you go through that course, that program, that app, whatever it is, and then go into your college course. Well, now this is the process of still going into, even if you're in like a 101 course, you're going into that, and then you're adding that on top of what you know. So you would do really well if you went this way, if you practiced and then went into that, because now when you go through that course, your brain can actually process what you're learning and place it, because you've already had some amount of exposure. It's like when you're learning your native language and you start speaking at home, right? You're speaking for 4 or 5 years before you go to school. You go to school and then you start learning, how to form sentences, how to punctuation. You start learning how to write and read and all of these things. But you've already had all of this exposure to the language. You can speak a little bit, you can kind of get by, you can babble, but you had that exposure, and then you go into school. Now it's building those structures. Of course, it's not going to take necessarily 12 years like you do going through grade school. You can do it much faster than your native language, but it is definitely going to be a much better use of your time when you go to school if you have already done your work on your own, because it's that same idea. It's that idea of having that exposure and then going into learning how to use the structures. Because without that, you're going into use these structures, and then it makes language learning so staccatic. It's like, it makes it feel like it's just structures when it's not. Language is spoken before it's written. Language was developed as speech, and then a writing system was developed. So we do need to think about, we don't need to just think too much. You don't need to think too much. That's the whole idea. You don't need to think too much when you're learning a language, because the idea is to be able to speak fluently and fluidly, and to do that there is less thought involved than actually when you're learning all of those structures. And that's what makes it kind of robotic when you're learning those structures, and that's what makes non-native speakers sound so unnatural, is that they are learning based on those structures, and they're not learning so much of just usage of the language. So as much as you can allow yourself the time and space to practice freely in the language, that is what is ultimately going to move you closer toward fluency. And this is what I wish I knew before I started learning Spanish, because I would have progressed much more quickly and I would have learned much more in my courses, and I probably would have saved some money. So that's what I wish I knew before. I hope that this is helpful to you guys, and as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, please let me know if you have any questions, anything you would like my advice on as far as language learning, and I'll be responding to you guys in the comments. So let me know down below, and I will see you guys back here for another video very, very soon. Bye guys!